Sexual aggression. Sexual aggression is recognized as a major problem across the world, and the #MeToo movement that started in 2017 in response to allegations of widespread sexual aggression in the film industry, personified by the Harvey Weinstein scandal, has raised awareness of the problem far beyond this specific context. In addition to research on childhood sexual abuse, reviewed in the previous chapter, a large and interdisciplinary body of research has studied sexual aggression in adolescence and adulthood. The majority of this work addressed sexual aggression by male perpetrators against female victims, but there is growing recognition that sexual aggression may also be committed by women towards men, as well as in same-sex relationships. In this chapter, we discuss definitions of sexual aggression, present data on the prevalence of sexual aggression in different victim-perpetrator constellations, review current explanations of the causes of sexual aggression, ask what factors may increase a person's vulnerability to sexual victimization, and provide findings on the effects of sexual aggression on victims' mental and physical health. The focus will be on sexual aggression in direct, face-to-face interactions, but it should be noted that online sexual harassment and stalking have also been studied as forms of sexual aggression, not involving direct physical contact. In contrast to intimate partner violence, see Chapter 8, it is undisputed that sexual violence is gender asymmetrical, with men featuring primarily as perpetrators and women as victims of sexual aggression. As will be shown, this gender imbalance is reflected both in sexual offenses recorded by the police and in large-scale victimization surveys. Nonetheless, the problem of women's sexual aggression against male victims, although far less common, entails similarly adverse consequences, as will be shown later in this chapter. Definitions and scale of sexual aggression. As a summary term, sexual aggression refers to a range of sexual activities, such as sexual intercourse, oral sex, kissing, and sexual touching, imposed on another person against his or her will. It involves a range of coercive strategies, such as threat or use of physical force, exploitation of the victim's inability to resist, abuse of a position of power, or verbal pressure. Sexual aggression also includes unwanted sexual attention in the form of sexual harassment, stalking, and obscene phone calls. Sexual aggression, making someone engage in sexual activities against their will through a range of coercive strategies, such as threat or use of physical force, exploitation of the inability to resist, or verbal pressure. A comprehensive definition of sexual violence is given by the World Health Organization. Sexual violence is defined as any sexual act, attempt to obtain a sexual act, unwanted sexual comments or advances, or acts to traffic or otherwise directed against a person's sexuality using coercion by any person regardless of their relationship to the victim in any setting, including but not limited to home and work. Coercion can cover a whole spectrum of degrees of force. Apart from physical force, it may involve psychological intimidation, blackmail, or other threats. For instance, the threat of physical harm, or being dismissed from a job, or of not obtaining a job that is sought. It may also occur when the person aggressed on is unable to give consent, for instance, while drunk, drugged, asleep, or mentally incapable of understanding the situation. Beyond this broad definition, specifying exactly what behaviors qualify as sexual aggression and how to distinguish between different forms of sexual aggression is not a straightforward task, and there are at least 3 frameworks in which definitions of sexual aggression can be located. The first is the legal framework that distinguishes between different forms of sexual violence in accordance with legal provisions. For example, rape is defined in many jurisdictions in terms of obtaining sexual acts involving the penetration of the body without consent, whereas sexual acts that do not involve the penetration of the body qualify as sexual assault or coercion. The second framework is provided by research definitions that guide conceptual and empirical work on the extent of and risk factors for sexual aggression. Research definitions often include forms of sexual aggression that are not considered to be criminal offenses, such as verbal pressure and psychological manipulation. The third framework is the socially shared, common sense definition of sexual aggression that is informed by stereotypical notions of real rape and plays a role in social responses to victims of sexual assault. Each set of definitions is linked to specific strategies for measuring sexual aggression, which is why we discuss definitions and data sources for the estimation of prevalence figures together in the next sections. Legal definitions of rape and crime statistics. Legal definitions vary with regard to the type of sexual acts and coercive strategies that constitute rape, and in distinguishing between other forms of sexual aggression that are considered to be criminal offenses. In this section, exemplary evidence will be provided for the U.S., England, and Wales, and Germany to show how rape is defined as a criminal offense and represented in annual crime statistics recorded by the police. In all three countries, legal definitions extend to male victims and to rape in marriage. Crime statistics yield incidence rates of the number of cases reported annually to the law enforcement agencies. For the purposes of nationwide statistics on recorded crime, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, in the U.S. defines rape as the penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. Attempts or assaults to commit rape are also included in the statistics, but statutory rape without force and other sex offenses are excluded. In 2018, 139,380 cases of rape were recorded in the database, which corresponds to a rate of 42.6 cases per 100,000 inhabitants. In England and Wales, rape is legally defined in the Sexual Offences Act of 2003 as intentional vaginal, anal, or oral penetration with the penis when the other person does not consent to the penetration and the actor does not reasonably believe that the other person consents. This definition of rape covers both marital rape and rape of male victims, but is limited to male perpetrators. During the period from July 2018 to June 2019, 58,947 cases of rape were recorded by the police, which corresponds to a rate of 100 cases per 100,000 inhabitants. In Germany, the legal definition of Section 177 has recently changed from a definition based on the use of force to a definition based on lack of consent, which includes the exploitation of a victim's inability or fear to resist, for example, because the offender threatens physical harm or exploits an element of surprise. Figures for 2018 show that 9,234 cases of rape were reported to the police, representing a rate of 11.2 cases per 100,000 inhabitants. Of the victims, 95.2% were female, and of the perpetrators, 99% were male. Comparing annual incidence rates across countries is difficult because of variations in the legal definitions of rape and other sexual offenses. This variability is reflected, for example, in the 5th edition of the European Sourcebook of Crime and Criminal Justice Statistics, which includes data from 41 countries. Incidence rates of police-recorded rapes in 2011, the latest figures available for the report, showed a mean annual rate of 11.6 per 100,000 inhabitants, but the country-specific rates ranged from 0.5 per 100,000 inhabitants in Armenia to 69.4 per 100,000 in Sweden. Part of this variation is due to differences in the scope of legal definitions, but other factors, such as willingness to report, are also likely to be involved in this wide variation. Research definitions and surveys. It is generally agreed that crime statistics reflect only a small minority of cases of sexual aggression because sexual violence is a vastly underreported crime, both in terms of the actual number of cases and relative to other crimes of violence. For example, of all respondents who reported the experience of an attempted or completed rape in the crime survey in England and Wales from 2014 to 2017, only 17% said they had reported it to the police. Of the rape experiences reported in the National Crime Victimization Survey in the U.S. in 2018, no more than 24.9% were reported to the police. In the same year, the reporting rate was 62.6% for robbery and 60.5% for aggravated assault, indicating that underreporting is a problem specific to sexual aggression. To come closer to estimating the true scale, Representative surveys elicit reports of sexual aggression from the perspective of victims, irrespective of whether or not they were reported to the police. By comparing the rates detected in these studies with official crime statistics, it is possible to gauge the number of cases of rape and other forms of sexual aggression that go unreported. Moreover, victimization surveys can examine differences in prevalence rates in relation to sexual orientation and/or gender constellations between victims and perpetrators. Synthesizing the results from population-based surveys carried out with women aged 15 years and older in a wide range of countries, the World Health Organization, 2013, found that the lifetime prevalence of non-partner sexual assault was 7.2% across the 58 countries for which data were available. The life prevalence for physical and sexual assault by an intimate partner was 30%. No separate figures for sexual victimization by an intimate partner were provided. The rates were higher in the low and middle income regions than in the high income regions. However, it must be noted that the findings were aggregated across individual studies that varied in relation to the definition and assessment of sexual assault. Regular victimization surveys with representative samples are conducted in several countries to obtain 1-year and/or lifetime prevalence data on sexual assault. In the U.S., the National Crime Victimization Survey, NCVS, provides estimates of criminal victimization in the general population from the age of 12 years, including both heterosexual and homosexual rape. The most recent data show that the annual rate of rape or sexual assault victimization increased from 1.6 to 2.7 victimizations per 1,000 persons aged 12 or older from 2015 to 2018. The National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, NISVS, found that about 1 in 5 women, 20.3% surveyed in 2015, reported having experienced an attempted or completed rape, defined as unwanted penetrative sex, at some point in their lifetime. The corresponding rate for men was 1 in 17, 2.9%. Representative victimization surveys also examined differences in prevalence rates in relation to sexual orientation. Analyzing data from the National Violence Against Women Survey, NVAWS, which also included victimization reports from male participants, Messenger, 2011, found that the rate of sexual victimization by an intimate partner in same-sex relationships was significantly higher than in heterosexual relationships for men, 3.1% versus 0.2%, and slightly lower for women, 3.5% versus 4.5%. A review by Rothman, Exner, and Bogman, 2011, of prevalent studies on sexual assault against gays, lesbians, and bisexuals found rates of adult sexual assault among gay and bisexual men ranging from between 10% and 17%, and rates among lesbian and bisexual women ranging between 11% and 53%. The report of the 2013 National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, NISVS, presented lifetime prevalence rates of sexual victimization by sexual orientation. For women, the report found a far higher rape victimization rate for bisexual, 46.1%, than for heterosexual, 17.4%, and lesbian, 13.1% respondents. In all three groups, the perpetrator was male in more than 85% of the cases. The rape victimization rate for heterosexual men was 0.7%, and the numbers were too small to calculate rates for gay and bisexual respondents. However, rates for other unwanted sexual contact, such as unwanted kissing in a sexual way, fondling, or grabbing sexual body parts, could be computed and were 10.8% for heterosexual, 21.1% for bisexual, and 32.3% for gay men. About 3/4 of the gay and 2/3 of the bisexual victims were victimized by another man. In the heterosexual victim group, 70% of the cases involved a female perpetrator, either acting alone or with a man. In the UK, annual rates of sexual victimization are provided by the Crime Survey for England and Wales. Findings cover a 2-year period from March 2016 to March 2018 showed that 0.5% of female and 0.1% of male respondents reported having experienced a completed rape, non-consensual penetrative sex. Among respondents surveyed between March 2016 and March 2017, 4.5% of women and 0.2% of men reported having experienced a completed rape since the age of 16. In 99% of cases, the offender was male. For Germany, in a representative sample of more than 10,000 women aged between 16 and 85 years, 13% reported having had unwanted sexual experiences, defined on the basis of the legal definition of rape and sexual assault since the age of 16. A later representative survey of women aged between 21 and 40 years of age by Hellman et al. 2018 asked about attempted or completed unwanted sexual intercourse or similar activities through the threat or use of force and found a prevalence rate since the age of 16 of 5.4% and a 5-year prevalence rate of 2.5%. Surveys of college students. The 1 in 5 statistic for the lifetime prevalence of women's risk of sexual assault revealed by the NISVS has also been confirmed in a review of prevalence studies involving female college students. In the U.S., systematic surveys on sexual aggression and victimization among college students were pioneered by Koss et al. 1987, who used the Sexual Experiences Survey, SES, see Chapter 1, to elicit women's self-reports of sexual victimization and men's self-reports of perpetration. They found that more than 50% of female students reported some form of sexual victimization since the age of 14. More than 25% of the male students indicated that they had forced a woman to engage in sexual acts at some point after the age of 14. Prompted by President Obama's White House Task Force to Protect Students from Sexual Assault installed in 2014, large-scale surveys assessing the prevalence of sexual aggression among college students have increased. A review by Krauss et al. 2019 identified 107 reports from 101 higher educational institutions, which varied substantially in the way they defined and assessed sexual assault. Using a unified methodology, the AAU Campus Climate Survey commissioned by the American Association of Universities collected data at 33 universities. Cantor et al. 2019. Across the participating universities, 25.9% of female undergraduates reported having experienced non-consensual sexual contact by force or inability to consent since starting university, with a range from 14% to 32%. The rate for male undergraduates was 6.8%. Looking at forms of sexual aggression other than attempted or completed rape, such as penetrative sex through the use of verbal pressure or non-penetrative sex using physical force or threat or exploiting the victim's inability to resist, far higher rates have been identified. A survey with more than 10,000 students differing in sexual orientation showed that the prevalence rate of forced sexual intercourse in the past 12 months was more than twice as high in sexual minority students who identified as gay, lesbian, bisexual, queer, pansexual, or other than in heterosexual students, 5.9% versus 2.2%. A special vulnerability for bisexual individuals or those who have sex with both men and women was also found in other studies. Internationally, a study including convenience samples of both female and male college students in 38 sites across 18 countries established that 2.3% of women had experienced forced sex and 24.5% had experienced verbal coercion by an intimate partner in the previous year. There was considerable variation between sites, with victimization rates from forced sex ranging from 0% to 13%. The corresponding rates for men were 2.8% and 22%, respectively, with a range for forced sex from 0% to 12%. Another study with convenient samples of university students from 10 countries in the European Union also found substantial variability in the prevalence of sexual victimization, measured across different victim-perpetrator constellations. Victimization comprised unwanted sexual touch and attempted and completed penetrative sex through the use or threat of force, exploiting the victim's inability to resist, and the use of verbal pressure. The overall victimization rate for women was 32.2%, and country-level figures ranged between 19.7% Lithuania and 45.5% Greece. For men, the overall victimization rate was 27.1%, with a range from 10.1% Belgium to 55.8% Greece. A study with first-year students in Germany based on the same instrument and design found a victimization rate of 35.9% for women and 19.4% for men since the age of 14 years, the age of consent in Germany. A smaller body of survey-based research with college students has collected prevalence data on perpetration. A review of 78 samples from studies conducted in the U.S. and Canada found an average rate of 29.3% for any form of male sexual assault perpetration and of 6.5% for rape. In the European study by Craigie et al., 2015, perpetration reports were collected from men and women. Across all countries, 16.3% of men and 5% of women reported at least one act of sexual aggression perpetration since the age of consent, with figures ranging from 5.5% Belgium to 48.7% Greece for men, and from 2.6% Belgium to 14.8% Greece for women. In the German sample studied by Craigie and Berger, 2013, the perpetration rates were 13.2% for male and 7.6% for female respondents. In the latter two studies, the victimization and perpetration rates were substantially higher among men and women for participants who had sexual contacts with both opposite-sex and same-sex partners, as compared with participants who only had opposite-sex contacts, consistent with research from the U.S. discussed above. Surveys of high school students. It is becoming increasingly clear from large surveys of adolescents that sexual aggression and victimization start well before college age and have substantial prevalence rates in teen dating relationships. Representative data for students in grades 9 to 12 are available from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. In the 2017 survey, 11.3% of girls and 3.5% of boys reported having been made to engage in sexual intercourse against their will through the use of force in the past year, and a comparison of surveys showed that the rate had not changed significantly since 2007. In a separate question, youth were asked about experiencing sexual violence in a dating relationship, which was reported by 10.7% of the female and 2.8% of the male respondents. Using data from the same survey, Olson et al. 2017 found that the rate of sexual victimization by a dating partner was significantly higher in youth identifying as lesbian, gay, or bisexual, and those not sure about their sexual identity than among heterosexual youth. In a representative survey of adolescents aged 14 to 17 years in Germany, 22% of sexually active German girls and 30% of sexually active girls from ethnic minorities reported that a boy or man had tried to make them engage in sexual acts or sexual touch by putting pressure on them. A study with Spanish adolescents presenting a broad range of coercive tactics, from manipulation to the use of physical force to measure victimization and perpetration in relationships with other youth, found a victimization rate of 46.6% for female and 48.7% for male adolescents. The perpetration rate showed a clear gender difference, with 48.1% of male and 27.6% of female participants endorsing at least one of the sexual aggression items. Overall, the brief discussion of different data sources available to estimate the scale of sexual violence suggests several conclusions. First, it shows that sexual violence is indeed a serious societal problem, affecting a large number of individuals and showing substantial prevalence rates in general population surveys and surveys of college and high school students. Second, sexual violence is a gendered problem in that women are more likely to be victimized than men and perpetrators are predominantly male. However, see below for a discussion of female perpetration. And there is evidence of a special vulnerability of sexual minority groups. Third, official statistics of sexual assaults reported to the police only reflect a small part of the problem because a majority of cases never enter the criminal justice system, as established by comparing the results from victimization surveys with official crime statistics. This last point brings us to a discussion of the potential reasons for the low reporting rates of sexual assault. As we will see in the next section, sexual assault is not only a legal category or a construct for research studies, but also a social construction that is defined by a consensus in society.